Hi there, welcome back to my YouTube channel, Watched by Ashley. Thank you so much for joining me. This is where we get to discuss some of the newest releases on the big streaming platforms, whether that be for television or for film. And today we're going to be taking a look at Netflix's Blonde. So this movie on paper sounds like it should be a smash hit right out of the park. Netflix, please take my money. I mean, this is a Marilyn Monroe film that stars Ana de Armas, Adrien Brody, Bobby Cannavale, and it was executively produced by Brad Pitt. And Brad Pitt has had a string of success in terms of films that he served as executive producer on. And you think about 12 Years a Slave, Selma, Beale Street Could Talk, Moonlight, and even Fury. So, I mean, he's really honed in on all of the films that he wants to work on, so you would think that this is going to be another great pick of his. The film is directed by Andrew Dominik, and this film really falls flat. It had so much potential, and a lot of the time I found myself wondering what direction they were going in. It feels like they were trying to do so many different things, but they didn't accomplish anything with this movie. Ana de Armas is an amazing actress. I adore her. I cannot wait to see her in the John Wick spin-off, The Ballerina. I loved her as the newest Bond girl. I think she is just fantastic, and she's always a pleasure to watch. But in this film, I did not enjoy her performance. I thought that she had enormous shoes to fill, and she didn't fill them. And although she did really act her heart out, and she definitely deserves some praise in the fact that she really put a lot of effort in the role, but I still think she fell short. Although hair and makeup, they really did try their best to capture the essence of Marilyn. Every time I see Ana de Armas, I just felt like she was wearing a blonde wig. I didn't really feel Marilyn Monroe. And I guess you could say this is a fictional film that kind of takes place in a dream of Marilyn Monroe, and we're seeing things like in this nightmarish point of view, but still, it just didn't sell it for me. I feel like when you are doing a film that involves such a huge icon like Marilyn, you really need to nail it correctly. You need to get it spot on. And they just didn't do that for me. In terms of the direction, I found it to be very disjointed. There was a lot of different techniques used, and they didn't seem to flow cohesively. Like, the film is black and white and it's color. Then we have some CGI in the movie, and it's just very strained. A lot of the shots, they're in focus, they're out of focus, or there's even like this really weird scene where Marilyn's being kind of harassed by the paparazzi or the media, and the mouths are distorted. And it's very strange because the film doesn't really give you the sense that that's appropriate for it. Like, it's just like they took like creative liberties randomly with not establishing that that's the direction that they're going in. So I really felt the movie was like really wish-washy and all over the place. Another thing that I personally felt about the film, without going to spoilers, is that it seemed to be very exploitive of Marilyn Monroe's legacy, and unnecessarily so. This film doesn't do anything to build up Marilyn. I feel like they took her name just to sell the film. I know the film is based on a book of the same title. It's not a biopic, it's fictional. But I think if you are unaware of that and you watch this movie, you will have the wrong ideas of Marilyn Monroe and the people that interacted with her at that time in her life. And I think that's really unfair. I don't know, like, if they wanted to give a new aspect of Marilyn, that was what their hope was, but they actually ended up doing more harm than good. They didn't do anything to further her as a person. They didn't make her seem like, oh, she's not a ditzy blonde like everyone assumes she is. They just really hit you over the head with the fact that she was a sex symbol and treated like meat, and that's all she really was in Hollywood. And I really didn't like that. They tried to make a division between Marilyn Monroe and Norma Jean, her actual given name, and made it seem like Marilyn Monroe was just this stage performer or this entity of her, not the actual person. But it didn't do enough to really drive home the fact that Norma Jean or Marilyn Monroe was a person who deserved respect and care, and had her own ambitions in life. This movie it doesn't do her any service, and I just feel like they could have been more effective with this movie if they actually just based it off of a made-up fictional starlet trying to make a name for herself in the 1950s. They could have done something like Forrest Gump, where this girl is up and coming and she gets to do the big movies with the big stars like Jane Russell, and that would have been pretty cool. Instead of kind of just tearing down somebody who's already been beaten up by society in terms of her reputation. I think this is just another jab at her, and I really didn't enjoy it for that reason. Well, that's one of the reasons I didn't enjoy it. And as I mentioned, it's not based on any facts at all. This is completely fiction, and they took a lot of liberties here. It's one of the first Netflix movies with the equivalent of an R rating, and that's because it is very, it has very mature content matter for sure. It deals with very hard topics. There's nudity. Sex is a big aspect of this. Not in terms of there being a lot of sex scenes, but lots of implications of sex. So you have to be very mindful of that if you want to watch this movie. Even for myself, there are aspects that like I found it to be very exhausting to watch because I felt like it was over the top. The nudity that's in the movie is mainly with Ana de Armas. She is topless in a lot of the movie, and I don't have a problem with her being topless. Where I take issue is that I felt like it was excessive. Like she didn't have to spend a third of the movie topless, and it didn't do anything to serve the plot. So that was just like a really weird decision. Well, first of all, if you want to watch the movie, do it at your own risk. I can't in good conscience recommend it, but I would say you can make a drinking game out of it because through the last 2/3 of the movie, she ends up saying daddy so many times. You can have a shot for every time she says daddy, and it might make it tolerable because it's just excessive. Like, I understand that she has daddy issues because she grew up without her father. But her calling her husband's daddy, it was just really off-putting and awkward, and it wasn't done in a sexy way. It wasn't like Wolf of Wall Street, Margot Robbie teasing Leonardo DiCaprio saying, "What's the matter, daddy?" No, this was like just, "Daddy, help me. Daddy, do this. Daddy, am I a good girl?" And I just could not stand it. And it's not say it just happens once or twice. It's like a chunk of the movie, and it's very distracting, and I don't know what they're trying to accomplish. But anyways, like I said, I don't recommend it. I'll do a high-level summary of it because it's not a biopic, so a lot of it's not based in any kind of reality. So I'll summarize it for you in case you don't want to watch the movie. So let's get into spoilers. So the movie starts off with us meeting Norma Jean and her mom, Gladys. They live alone. Norma Jean's very young. It's her birthday, and her mom is kind of like, "Oh, one day you're going to meet your dad," because Norma Jean was born out of wedlock and no one knows who her father is. Gladys tells Norma Jean that her father is like a famous actor who lives in Hollywood and he's going to come for them one day. And this is like, the mom is really rattled by this. She was clearly having an affair with a gentleman at her work at one of the film studios and had a daughter and was abandoned, and her life has been a wreck ever since Norma Jean was born, and she takes it out on her. And it gets so bad one night where the mom actually literally tries to kill Norma Jean, and Norma Jean ends up going to a neighbor for solace, and the mom ends up being put into a mental institution. During all of this, Norma Jean unfortunately is put into an orphanage because no one can take care of her. And it's very upsetting for Norma Jean because she feels like, I'm not an orphan, like I have a father, I don't know where he is, but he's out there. My mom is alive, but she clearly is not capable of taking care of her. And so Norma Jean makes it her mission to find out who her dad is and wants to get in that world of acting because she knows that they have something to do with film. So she ends up becoming like a pinup model and starts doing little roles here and there, making a name for herself. But as she's breaking into the industry, unfortunately, she becomes a victim of the casting couch. And so, as many of you are familiar, especially after the Me Too movement, women were exploited if they wanted to get roles in Hollywood, and that's kind of how Marilyn was born and started her rise to fame. She unfortunately was taken advantage of physically, and we're shown that in the movie. And it's very traumatic for her, you know. She ends up separating herself. She ends up separating Norma Jean from Marilyn Monroe as two separate people because that's the only way she can cope with the pressure to be a superstar and the pressures of kind of giving herself away morally, in a sense. So during this time, as she's trying to perfect her craft of acting, she ends up meeting two juniors of two well-known actors, and one of them ends up being the son of Charlie Chaplin. And they end up awakening Norma Jean sexually. And it's a very interesting and strange choice that they made here because they made these two gentlemen bisexual, even though the directors referred to them as gay. Two bisexual men who end up having sex with Marilyn and bringing out this other side of her, and it really awakens this bombshell image that she ends up having, because she is sexually empowered, because this is a positive experience for her. So she's in this throuple, she's sleeping with both the men. At the same time, her career is really taking off, and she ends up getting pregnant. And her manager kind of warns her before. He's like, you got to be careful if you're going to be doing these things. But she ends up getting pregnant. She wants to keep the baby. And the father is like, okay, sure, I support you, whatever you want to do. Like, this will be great. And as she finds out that her mom actually has a mental illness and it runs in her family, she then decides that she doesn't want to have the baby. So she calls the studio. They arrange an abortion appointment for her. And at the last minute, she decides she doesn't want to have an abortion. So she's trying to get them to stop the procedure, but they're carrying on with it. She has the abortion. She's very upset. She ends up going to do a film that she originally rejected because she wanted to have the baby. She's not happy about it. And it's really tough on her. And at that time, she ends up meeting Joe DiMaggio. They don't reference his name in the movie, because in the book it's also not referenced, probably because his family would have sued them. But anyway, so she ends up marrying Joe DiMaggio. But during that time, she's just receiving these letters from someone saying that, like, who's claiming to be her father, and saying that they want to meet her and that they're so sorry that they weren't able to be in her life. And it really gets to her emotionally. And this is where she starts referring to her husband as daddy, which is weird. This is during the peak of Marilyn's success, and she's very desirable. But DiMaggio, he just retired from sports. He's no longer playing baseball. He comes from a traditional Italian family. He wants Marilyn to be that way as well. And it's very hard for her. Like, she's a sex symbol who doesn't know how to take care of a home. And it puts them at odds. Like, DiMaggio wants her to be a housewife. He doesn't want her putting herself out physically and having men lust after her. He tells her specifically and adamantly, like, I want you to do roles that you're not selling yourself anymore. And she's like, of course I want that too. But she just gets so caught up to this fame. It's an addiction for her. And of course, you have that infamous scene where she's standing over the subway air draft, and you have her skirt going up, and DiMaggio's there, and he sees that, and he gets so upset because she's just getting all the guys worked up and loving it while they're looking up her skirt. And so of course he gets, when they get home, he's pissed and he beats her up, and it's really hard to see. And she's just like calling him daddy and saying she's going to be better, and it is very hard to watch. So they obviously end up splitting, and she's upset about it. And then she ends up meeting her second husband, Arthur Miller, while she's auditioning to be a part of one of his roles. He was just so impressed by her understanding of his characters, and that they were on the same page in terms of his vision for how he wanted everything to work out. And so they end up getting married. He's much older. But they're also different worlds, right? Like, he's more of an intellect, and he doesn't really think that much of her in the sense that they're not that serious. She ends up wanting to really settle down with him. She doesn't want to act anymore, but he pushes her back into it because having that influence is important to him. She ends up getting pregnant, and she's very happy and excited because she wants to keep this baby. She made the mistake of having the abortion the last time, so this baby was very important to her. Unfortunately, by accident, she ends up falling. She loses the baby. She's devastated by it. And it really wrecks her. She goes back to work, but she starts using drugs to kind of sedate her because she's just reeling from the loss of the baby. And by doing all these drugs, she's really abusing herself and the people around her. She has terrible temper tantrums, and she's very hard to work with. And her husband, Arthur Miller, says to her, like, you're destroying yourself. Like, stop doing these drugs. But she just can't stop. Like, she gets to the point where she doesn't recognize him anymore. She tells him to leave her alone, and it's just really rough. Then, of course, that relationship ends up in divorce. She gets more letters from her father figure saying he's like, yeah, I want to see you. I'm sorry I haven't been able to see you. I've been sick. He makes all these reasons as to why he can't see her, while at the same time putting digs in at her, like telling her that she's kind of made the wrong choices, and he wishes that her marriage has lasted, and all these things. As we're watching her downfall, since she's heavily into drugs and drinking excessively, we end up seeing a glimpse of her relationship with Bobby Kennedy. And he basically just uses her like a piece of meat. The Secret Service is dragging her around, like, to and from to see him. He physically just uses her to get off. It's really rough to watch, actually, because there's this whole scene of her pleasuring him orally, and it's excessive. But anyways, she ends up having this nightmare that she's pregnant by Bobby Kennedy and forced into an abortion. And yeah, it's rough. And shortly after, she gets a letter from her father saying that he's dying and he's sorry he didn't get to meet her, and she's devastated. Then a few weeks later, she gets a phone call from one of the gentlemen from that throuple that she was in earlier. He informs her that Chaplin Jr. has passed away, and she's devastated. And he's like, he has some things he wanted me to send to you, so I'm gonna send them. She doesn't really want it, but he forces her. She gets it. She opens the box. She finds out that the letters from her father were actually written by her former lover, pretending to be her dad. And she's completely destroyed by that because she was really hoping to meet her dad, and she ends up overdosing on drugs and dying. That's the movie. It was just a very confusing film in terms of the directions that they were going in. I don't really think the film or the director knew where they wanted to stick their landing. The movie didn't even know when to wrap up. And then the big twist at the end, in terms of like all these letters she was receiving, thinking that they were from her father, they actually were from one of the gentlemen from her throuple. Like, and he ends up dying before her, which in reality is completely false because Charlie Chaplin Jr. died after Marilyn Monroe. And when you find that out, it's just like, well, then what was the whole point of that storyline? What was the whole point of the threesome? Like, this just doesn't work at all. It's just very stupid. And all of it could have been solved. Like, majority of these issues could have been solved if they just didn't make this a Marilyn Monroe story. They could have just made it a story of a nameless, made-up, up-and-coming starlet who's rising to fame and deals with all the pitfalls of the casting couch and being treated like a piece of meat. And they could have told that story, but just not have it be about Marilyn Monroe. Like, these are big shoes to fill, and they didn't fill them. And it just, when you have Marilyn Monroe as the main focal point of your story and you don't get that 100% accurate, or you don't nail her character, your whole film kind of falls apart and loses its meaning and loses its direction. And that was clearly what happened here. And it's just very disappointing because there's a lot of talented people involved in this film. Adrien Brody was awesome as Arthur Miller. And there are some amazingly, beautifully directed scenes in this movie, but just other parts just take away from it so badly. Just the changing in styles, the use of CGI for the fetus and having the fetus talk to her, just strange decisions that really take away and distract from this movie, and it's just such a damn shame. And I can't recommend it to anybody. I know some people love it and they think it's a different way of telling a story or a different representation of a biopic, but it's not a biopic. It's fiction paraded as a biopic, and I think shame on Netflix, shame on the producers for not explicitly saying this is totally fiction, this is completely made up. We're just using Marilyn's name because it is like, it's such a dishonor to her. I found it to be like very disrespectful, to be honest with you. I don't think like in today's day and age that we should be making films like this because it serves no purpose, really. This someone's idea of what Marilyn was or should be, and it's completely inaccurate and doesn't do anything for her character or her legacy. And I'm just really disappointed this movie came out the way it did. I think that if they changed the actor and actually put some more thought into what they're trying to tell or what kind of message they're trying to portray to people, it could have been more impactful, but they didn't, and the film doesn't work for me. So those are my thoughts in regards to the film. Let me know in the comments below if you've seen Blonde or what your favorite biopic is. Like, if there's something that actually accurately captures a historical figure, let me know in the comments below. I'd like to check it out. That's all I have for you today. If you watched the video up to this point, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. If you like the content that you're watching, please give me a like and subscribe. It'll really help me growing the channel, and I definitely appreciate it. So until next time, thank you so much, and I will see you later. Take care. Bye.